This is Holy Trinity Church at Blythburgh, located on the estuary of the River Blythe in Suffolk, about 5 miles upriver from the popular coastal resort of Southwold. It's a spectacular building, however, our interest is primarily with the events that took place during the morning of the 4th of August 1577, when, according to legend, the notorious demonic hound Black Shuck burst in through the doors of the church to a clap of thunder. It ran up and down the nave, past a large congregation, killing a man and a boy and causing the church spire to collapse through the roof. As the dog departed, it left scorch marks on the north door, which can be seen at the church to this day. Well, the church steeple definitely fell down that day and was never replaced. In fact, it damaged the roof so badly that it wasn't repaired for over 200 years, and the church interior became a roosting place for birds. More about that later. But what actually happened that day? The most likely explanation is the church was struck by ball lightning during a violent thunderstorm, which brought down the steeple and unfortunately killed 2 of the congregation, possibly from the lightning. Still, the Black Shuck tale is more spectacular. As for the scorch marks on the doors, more likely caused by candle flames. Two more things to note before we leave Blythburgh Church. The first are the spectacular angels on the inside of the roof. There are currently 12 of them, although there were possibly as many as 20 before the spire came down through the roof in 1577. The angels are also the subject of one of the church's more enduring legends, namely that in 1644, during the English Civil War, when the Puritan William Basher Dowsing was making his way around the eastern counties as the parliamentary commissioner for the destruction of monuments of idolatry and superstition, he and his men shot at the angels with their muskets in an attempt to destroy them, because they were so high up and inaccessible in the church and couldn't be reached by ladders. It's a wonderful story, and Basher Dowsing did indeed have a number of superstitious pictures, probably stained glass windows, destroyed along with some crosses and statues when he visited the church. But did he order the angels to be shot? The surprising answer is no, because when the angels were restored in the 1970s, the lead shot found in them was from 18th century, that's 100 years later. Why? Because there was a note in the church warden's account to say local men were paid for shooting jackdaws inside the building, another consequence of the roof damage when the spire came down. Also inside the church, you can find some intriguing, albeit now battered and worn carvings on the bench ends of the pews. These represent the 7 deadly sins, the 7 works of mercy, and the labours of the seasons. My favourite one is the one representing the deadly sin of slander. What else can I tell you about Blythburgh? Well, smuggling springs to mind because the town was a hotbed of smuggling in the 18th century. In fact, it was so bad that in 1750 a regiment of dragoons was stationed in the town to deal with the smugglers, the marshes and creeks of the River Blythe being an excellent location to unload and stash contraband brought upriver from the seaport town of Southwold. The White Hart pub on the riverside being a notorious meeting point for smugglers, while immediately across the road, the London Road, is the site of the old customs house. It was either the Blythburgh White Hart or a place very similar that was the inspiration for the Edwardian supernatural horror writer M.R. James to set his story Rats about the revenant of a pub landlord who was hanged in chains for smuggling. For the scariest ghost story associated with Blythburgh, we need to head just down the road a couple of miles to Blythburgh Common, to a place still shown on maps as Toby's Walks. The Toby in question is Toby Gill, commonly known as Black Toby, who was a drummer with a regiment of dragoons stationed at Blythburgh. Contemporary reports say little about Toby's ancestry, except that he is described as a Negro. From all accounts, Toby was a bit of a party animal, which was to become the death of him. In June 1750, a local woman, Anne Blakemore, was found dead in the woods. Nearby was Toby. He was just dead drunk. Despite the fact the inquest could find no clear explanation for Anne's death, it didn't stop the coroner's jury from returning a verdict that Toby had raped and murdered her after she'd rejected his lewd proposal, to use the words of a contemporary newspaper report. Toby protested his innocence at the subsequent murder trial at Bury Assizes that August. As well he might, as his only fault seems to have been being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he was black, and the 18th century's prejudices, I know, prejudice is still common in the 21st century, meant a guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion. Toby was hanged, and, as was also the convention in those days, his lifeless body was coated in tar, then hung in chains from a gibbet at the scene of the purported crime as a warning to others. Accounts say the gibbet was still there 50 years later, and when it was finally removed, its wood was cut into splinters, which were sold as cures for toothache. By then, the tradition had also grown up in that area, the walks. It was haunted by Toby's ghosts, and it's said that as late as the 1940s, almost 200 years later, locals would avoid the area at night. Ironically, tales of Toby's ghost may have been spread by the same smugglers his regiment was sent to tackle, a ghost being an excellent way of scaring people away from the area so smugglers could shift their contraband without risk of being disturbed. In more recent times, Toby's Walks was a picnic area, complete with car parking space and a public loo, but when I visited the place a few days ago, it was closed down, overgrown and fenced off. Perhaps Toby's ghost really does still haunt the place. The drone footage shows the village of Blythburgh, the surrounding marshes, the Black Shuck haunted church, and the Blythe estuary snaking its way down to the sea at Southwold. You can just glimpse the lighthouse at Southwold on the skyline.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, drop a comment below, and support us by hitting that subscribe button. For more weird tales, visit our website, www.urbanfantasies.com. Until next time, stay well, stay weird.
Also a popular tourist destination, but the towers also have a very long history with a dark edge. What we see today are the ruins of the old parish church of St Mary's. In its heyday in the medieval period, it would have been a spectacular building. Its twin towers, which were topped with spires, known as the Two Sisters, could be seen for miles around and for miles out at sea. Unfortunately, coastal erosion during the 17th and 18th centuries saw most of the village fall into the ocean. With the sea also growing dangerously close to the church, a proposal was made to build new sea defences to preserve the cliff on which the church stood. But in a stunning example of ecclesiastical vandalism, in 1809, the then vicar, Christopher Naylor, some say urged on by his equally Philistine mother, bullied the parish council into agreeing to the church's demolition and the construction of a replacement church at nearby Hilborough. The church was blown up with gunpowder. The lead from its roof sold for the equivalent of £77,000 at today's prices, and much of its stonework was used to build a harbour wall at Margate. In fact, the whole church would have probably vanished had it not been for the intervention of Trinity House, the organisation that looks after lighthouses, who purchased what was left of the church for £100 so they could preserve the two towers, which were an important navigational aid for shipping. You can still see the outline of the semicircular wall of the apse of the original church that was built on this site. This goes back 1,350 years to the year AD 669, when Christianity was still struggling to establish itself in England among the pagan Anglo-Saxons. It was in that year that King Egbert of Kent granted a priest called Bassa the land at Reculver on which to build a church. This would become the heart of a monastery which thrived for another 300 years until its monks were driven away by Viking raiders. But our story doesn't end here, or should I say start here, because before Bassa's church, a Roman fort occupied this site, and today you can still see some of the ruins of the fort's outer walls. The northern half of the walls have long ago been washed away by the sea. The fort, called Regalbium, was one of the earliest forts built by the Romans after their invasion in the year AD 43. Why? Because what we now call Reculver stood at the northern end of a long since silted up sea lane called the Wantsum Channel, which separated the Isle of Thanet, in the days when it really was an island, from the rest of Kent and the English mainland. Here we're just coming up to what would have been the eastern gateway into the Roman fort. But what, you ask, about the darker side of the Reculver story? Archaeological digs around the site in the 1960s found 5 sets of infant remains, all of them babies, within the foundations and walls of the buildings, and all associated with datable Roman finds, such as coins. The babies were probably buried as sacrifices, known as foundation sacrifices, a once widespread practice among ancient peoples, in the belief the spirits of the dead would act as eternal guardians of the fort and also their physical and spiritual foundation of the fort. There's even a theory the old nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady, refers to a foundation sacrifice, particularly the verse about setting a man to watch all night. What we don't know is if the Reculver babies were selected for burial because they were already dead, perhaps stillborn, or if they were buried alive or just killed for the purpose. The Romans, incidentally, believed this was a great honour. Whatever the circumstances of their deaths, a local legend has grown up that on dark winter's nights, the grounds of the fort are haunted by the sound of a crying baby. So, Reculver Towers, a lost shrine to early Christendom, as it's been described, and now a romantic ruin. What else can I tell you about the place? That during World War II, this area of the coast was used by the RAF to test their bouncing bombs before the Dambusters raids on Nazi Germany. Once again, the two sisters' towers of the old church came in handy as a clear landmark for navigators in their Lancaster bombers. They were, I should hasten to add, using dummy bombs in these tests. And finally, there is Auric Goldfinger, a villain in the James Bond story Goldfinger. In the original Ian Fleming novel, Goldfinger lives in a house in Reculver called The Grange, which also includes a secret factory from which he runs his international gold smuggling business. No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, drop a comment below, and support us by hitting that subscribe button. For more weird tales, visit our website www.urbanfantasies.com. Until next time, stay well, stay weird.
This place, it's the remains of St Mary's Church, Thorpe Harbour in South Norfolk. Reminds me of the lines of Shelley. That's Percy Shelley, the poet from 200 years ago, not the much missed Pete Shelley from the Buzzcocks. It's his poem Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stones stand in the desert. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." And this really sums up this place. Thorpe Harbour was once a thriving medieval village. The church, St Mary's, which you can see here, would once have served the community We're at the we're at the west end where the tower is. To the east, in this direction, over in that direction, there would have been the nave and the chancel. And from photographs of crop marks, it's quite clear that the church stood at the southern end of the village. So the village would have been in the area where I'm looking towards you now. And somewhere over here towards the west was the manor house. And then it all went. It was probably the Black Death which it hit East Anglia very hard in some areas, particularly where we are now. Something like 60% of the population were killed. And following on from the Black Death, there were changes in agriculture, and the world moved from fairly inefficient crop growing through to sheep farming. And so the villages decayed. And this was the fate of Thorpe Parva. We know that in 1482 the parish was combined with Scole, which is a nearby parish over to the west, and that by 1540, so we're talking nearly 500 years ago, the church was demolished, and all that remains are these two parts of the tower. They only exist because the tower was kept on and converted into a dovecot. In other words, a place where people could rear pigeons for their flesh. And that was it. The village was abandoned. Really is, as Shelley's lines talk about, really an example of hubris. The fact that we may think as people that we really control the world, but our legacies are impermanent. Within 100 years, not only are we forgotten, people have never heard of us. And this is the fate of this village here. So look upon the village of Thorpe Parva and despair. Way up there, that angle there, would have probably been, see if we can get it closer up. That would have probably been a window. And the red brick here, possibly a west door, which is quite unusual in a church, but again more likely a window. As for the tower itself, if the round towers elsewhere in East Anglia are anything to go by, this tower would have probably been double the height that's left now. Final thoughts on Thorpe Parva. I like the remoteness of it so much that I've used the image for the front cover of my latest book, and of course image of the book cover coming up shortly. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for
More videos
watching.
in this series
If you
to
enjoyed
come
it,
very
please
soon.
click the like button, drop a comment below, and support us by hitting that subscribe button. For more weird tales, visit our website www.urbanfantasies.com. Until next time, stay well, stay weird.